Good afternoon. I'm Victoria Marshall with the latest news from the Washington Watch news desk. With the 2024 election almost 3 weeks from now, both former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris are trying to shore up support among demographics they're trailing in. For Harris, it's black men. For Trump, it's women. Earlier today, Trump participated in a women's-only town hall hosted by Fox News. Participants asked Trump about a range of issues, including biological men competing in women's sports, illegal immigration, and the economy.
My question is, how do you plan on addressing the transgender issue in women's sports? I have 9 grandchildren, 6 of them female, all playing sports, and we are very concerned for their safety, not just on the field and the courts, but in their locker rooms as well.
Right. It's such an easy question, and everybody in the room, and you know that answer, we're not going to let it happen.
Furthering the discussion on immigrant crime, along with liberal-run cities where crime is out of control. My son is a Georgia Bulldog. He was on campus the day Laken Riley was murdered. You know, terrifying for all those kids, right? I wanted to know, like, how quickly in a sanctuary city, like they're calling Athens, Georgia, how quickly can you remove those threats to our society so that our children can go out on a run, as they rightfully should be able to do, in a park in the daytime by themselves? It should not be like that. And also, I was wondering, I watch television all the time. I see your ads. I don't see a lot of vocalness about these sort of crimes, these hideous crimes in your promotion. So I'm wondering why that is.
Well, we are into it. First of all, we are going to end all sanctuary cities immediately. We're going to end them because they're really...
Is that an executive order you do that with?
Really, I can do it with an executive order. I'll have to do it with an executive order. You can do it with the Aliens Act of 1798. We can do things in terms of moving people out. We can move them out of the sanctuary cities.
Kamala Harris, on the other hand, is ramping up her outreach to black men as polling shows her support among that demographic is at historic lows. For example, an estimated 90% of black men voted for President Joe Biden in 2020, but a new New York Times poll showed 78% are planning to vote for Harris, with 15% supporting former President Trump. To cut against Trump's gains with black men, Harris has proposed an opportunity agenda for black men that includes providing 1 million loans up to $20,000 for black entrepreneurs, legalizing recreational marijuana, protecting cryptocurrency investments, and launching health initiatives focused on illnesses that disproportionately impact black men. Conservative commentator Matt Walsh criticized Harris's proposal, tweeting, "So just to be clear, if a white entrepreneur applies for this loan, they will be turned down on the basis of their skin color. That is obviously completely unconstitutional, not even close to legal." And in other domestic news, the FBI has quietly revised its crime statistics to show violent crime actually went up by 4.5% in 2022. According to Real Clear Investigations, when the FBI originally released the final crime data for 2022 last year, it reported that the nation's violent crime rate fell by 2.1%. But the FBI has quietly revised those numbers, releasing new data that shows violent crime has actually increased in 2022 by 4.5%. The new data includes thousands more murders, rapes, robberies, and aggravated assaults. The Bureau made no mention of these revisions in a September 2024 press release. Real Clear Investigations noticed the difference by comparing the old data to the revised data. And in related news, sex trafficking has exploded thanks to the Biden-Harris border crisis. According to a new report from the Free Press, forced labor and prostitution among underage migrants more than tripled under President Biden, reaching record highs. The report details how cartels and gangs recruit children, usually between the ages of 15 and 17, to cross the border with the promise that they will get them a job. Once migrant children cross the border, they are placed in the care of the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which matches them with a sponsor in the U.S. The problem is the sponsor is not properly vetted. Once minors are placed with their sponsors, they end up getting trafficked. And those are today's headlines. I'm Victoria Marshall. Up next is Washington Watch with Tony Perkins. We'll see you tomorrow with more news.
From the heart of our nation's capital in Washington, D.C., bringing compelling interviews, insightful analysis, taking you beyond the headlines and sound bites into conversations with our nation's leaders and newsmakers, all from a biblical worldview. Washington Watch with Tony Perkins starts now.
The problem in Gaza is not lack of aid. The problem is Hamas, which hijacks the aid, stealing, storing, and selling it to feed their terror machine while civilians suffer. Despite all these challenges, Israel continues to uphold international law, going above and beyond our obligations.
That was Danny Danon, Israel's permanent representative to the United Nations, responding to the Biden administration's threat to withhold congressionally approved munitions to Israel if more humanitarian aid does not flow into Gaza. Welcome to Washington Watch. Thanks for tuning in. We'll explore this crisis in Israel and the broader Middle East with retired Air Force General John Teichert in just a moment. Yesterday, we discussed how the Biden administration their open border policy has driven gang-related crime and strained local schools with an influx of nearly 1 million illegal minors. Well, today we'll focus on the surge in sex trafficking, which experts say has tripled under the Biden-Harris administration.
It's economic, it's spiritual, it's human, it hits families, it impacts the communities, it impacts our economies. This is really among the most horrific crimes that happen.
That was Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost announcing a statewide human trafficking bust that netted 132 arrests. We'll dive deeper into this issue with Madeline Rowley, investigative reporter for the Free Press.
The only way we can reverse everything that we're talking about today and get rid of this law and to stop, politicians from interfering in our healthcare and put abortions about our reproductive lives back into the hands of pregnant people and doctors is to vote yes on Amendment 4.
That was Laura Goodhue, Executive Director of Planned Parenthood in Florida, promoting Amendment 4, which the abortion industry has put onto the November ballot, which would erase most of the state's pro-life laws. Now, a 348-page report released last week by the Florida Secretary of State revealed that proponents of this amendment engaged in fraud in the gathering of the required signatures. Well, today a lawsuit was filed in the Sunshine State to invalidate the amendment because of the fraud. We'll get more on the amendment from John Stenberger, president of Liberty Action in Florida. Finally, Lauren Cooley, executive director of the Institute for Faith and Culture, joins us to discuss new Lifeway research findings on the gap between evangelical beliefs and cultural engagement. That's coming up on this edition of Washington Watch. Now, it is election time, so I encourage you, get the tools you need to cast an informed ballot. Text the word toolkit to 67742. That's toolkit to 67742. And you'll have at your fingertips all the resources you need to cast an informed ballot. The Biden-Harris administration is being called out for threatening to withhold military aid from Israel if the Jewish state does not address what the administration calls humanitarian assistance into Gaza within 30 days. Now, this threat, revealed through a leaked letter sent by Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin to their Israeli counterparts, makes no mention of Hamas leadership stealing and withholding aid into Gaza, nor does it mention the hostages, including American citizens, still being held by Hamas. We've seen the Biden-Harris administration undermine Israel's war for its existence, but would they place an arms embargo on our ally, especially as many of these munitions are critically needed as the attacks on Israel continue? Joining us now to discuss this, retired Air Force Brigadier General John Teichert. After a distinguished military career, General Teichert retired as the Assistant Deputy Undersecretary of the Air Force for International Affairs, where he led international engagement on behalf of the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. Space Force, while managing the service's entire security cooperation portfolio. General Teichert, welcome to Washington Watch.
Tony, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So I want to get your reaction to this move by the Biden-Harris administration, given that the Israeli defense mechanism is really dependent in many ways upon U.S. munitions, even when we're looking at their air defense system. What do you make of this?
Tony, I think the word you used earlier is exactly right, that this undermines our friend in Israel at a critical time where they are on the verge of striking back against Iran. And now we continue to undermine them and provide top cover to terrorists and to Iran by making these types of threats that are consistent with the threats we've been making since February when we started talking about red lines in Rafah.
The defense systems that, of course, everyone is very familiar with the Iron Dome, but you have the Arrow, you have David Sling. These are, as you move up to the longer range, missiles that intercept these ballistic missiles like we saw on October the 1st, these become very expensive. The Arrow missiles, somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 million each. What kind of position would this put Israel in if they are not being supplied with the necessary munitions to defend their own country?
Tony, the United States is the #1 arms supplier to Israel for both offensive and defensive systems. And if all of a sudden we cut off that type of support, then now they are left defenseless against this multi-front war that is propagated by Iran. And it also ultimately undermines our credibility as a trusted friend and ally around the world. And I just think it's shameful that for domestic purposes to pander to the audience in places like Michigan that are looking for the Biden-Harris administration to take a tougher line against Israel, that now we're undercutting not just Israel at the verge of the most important moment in their history, which is striking back against Iran, and undercutting our alliance and friendship system around the world.
General, you were an Air Force fighter pilot before moving up in the command structure. Israel, reportedly, this is anonymous sources from the Biden administration gave this information to the Washington Post, that the Israelis have agreed not to hit petroleum manufacturing facilities or nuclear facilities. Does Israel have the capacity to strike nuclear facilities in Iran without U.S.
Tony,
help?
I think 3 weeks ago, the Israeli strike on 2 ports in Yemen demonstrate that they've got the range to have large-scale strike packages reach out to a distance further than Tehran or some of these nuclear sites within Iran. The challenge is that the nuclear systems that we're talking about are very heavily buried, 300 feet or more below ground, and without real tangible help, that it would be very difficult for Israel to strike sufficiently those type of targets. But I do think that it is unwise for the Biden administration to start leaking which targets are off the list for Israel. That just makes it easier for Iran to defend against those strikes. Every option should be on the table, and it should be a surprise ultimately to Iran which targets are struck when Israel decides to do so.
So, General, what assistance would Israel need in order to go after these nuclear facilities, as you've mentioned, are buried deep in the ground?
Exquisite intelligence is the first step, Tony, and that means knowing exactly where the key nodes are to strike, such that it would set back the nuclear program significantly. And then ultimately, the use of some very particular U.S. assets like deep bunker-busting bombs would be required to ultimately take out these sites. But I think with the exquisite intelligence that we could precisely strike or allow Israel to strike such that it would set back the nuclear program, and Iran would then have to think about what their next step should be, realizing that Israel has escalation dominance right now in this conflict between the two.
The bunker-busting bombs, are those not part of the munitions that the Biden administration was slow-walking and holding back from Israel?
They aren't, Tony. Those 2,000-pound bombs that the Biden-Harris administration has threatened to hold back from Israel now for months are not the type that could penetrate deep enough to strike some of those heavily buried and protected nuclear sites in Iran. We're talking about U.S.-only capability and things like the massive ordnance penetrator that would enable us to be able to strike that deep. And Israel doesn't have that capability and wouldn't even have that capability if President Biden and Vice President Harris delivered all of the capability that they needed to Israel.
By comparison, General, in Lebanon, in Beirut, where they took out the Hezbollah commander, how deep were those facilities?
those were tens of feet instead of hundreds of feet. And those 2,000-pound bombs that Biden and Harris have been threatening to withhold from Israel since their red line and Rafah comment are the type of munitions that have been necessary to strike those types of targets of Hezbollah leaders within Lebanon. And just the fact that for the last 8 months, Israel has had to protect itself against these threats from the United States has been shameful and has emboldened Iran and Hezbollah and the Houthis and others, because they know that not only is Israel striking back to protect themselves, but their closest friend is threatening to hold back aid to them at their moment of need.
So General Teichert, what type of munitions might the Biden-Harris administration withhold if Israel does not comply with their demand to get humanitarian aid into Gaza, more humanitarian aid into Gaza?
Tony, that they could pick any of those type of offensive or defensive munitions. The defensive ones, of course, would be the ones that protect them against 181 missile volley like we saw a few weeks ago from Iran. But then all of those offensive capabilities that are necessary for Netanyahu and the Israeli government to fulfill their objectives, which is to destroy Hamas, to recover the hostages, and then to be able to replace 60 to 80,000 Israelis that have been displaced from the north. And without the right number and type of munitions, offensively and defensively, it means that now Israel does not have the capability to fulfill its objectives. And that is, again, a shame on the United States, even to threaten holding back those type of weapons that are necessary for Israel to fulfill its wartime objectives.
General, I would just say if they're withholding defensive weapons like we were talking about with the air defense system, that would be unbelievable that we would do this to our strategic ally in the Middle East. I want to shift just a little bit to this humanitarian aid, where we're actually just this week evidence in Lebanon, southern Lebanon, as they found grenade launchers and weapons and ammunition that Hezbollah was storing for raids into Israel. They found USAID packages, humanitarian aid from the United Nations that the terrorist organizations are taking. I mean, they're doing this in Gaza, they're doing this in Lebanon, but yet the administration says Israel's got to move more in.
No, and I do think, Tony, that the administration is already starting to pat themselves on the back, that Israel is complying with the demands, which just indicates to me that this is all a political maneuver for those domestic audiences for the election. But I do think it is true that authoritarian regimes, and certainly terrorist regimes, don't care about the people in Gaza or in Lebanon. Frankly, I believe that Hezbollah is holding 5.5 million hostages, and those are the Lebanese people. Right. And unfortunately, the United Nations has not enforced UN Resolution 1701 from 2006. Correct. And now Israel is actually doing the bidding of the United Nations by driving Hezbollah to the north and de-arming them. And of course, all of the things that Hezbollah and Hamas and the others can get, even from UN agencies, are fair game for them because they don't care about the people that they claim they are supporting in Lebanon or Gaza or elsewhere.
And the U.S. policy is just fueling that. General Teichert, I want to thank you for joining us. Appreciate your insights.
Thanks, Tony.
Stick with us, folks. We're back with more after this.
We humbly, Father, bow before you in these moments that we have together, that this wouldn't just be any other conference, but that literally, Lord, you would reset our hearts to be in alignment with your word, that you would reset the city of Washington, D.C. to be in realignment with your word.
There's no politician, including Trump, that can affect the soul of this nation. You're the only one. The answer's not in the State House, and it's not going to be in the White House. It's got to be in your own house. It's got to be in the Church of God. It's got to be in his house.
Our principles never bend to politicians. Yes. Our principles never bend to politicians. By God's grace, it will be the other way around. Politicians will bend to our biblically based child protective principles.
No matter what comes in November, no matter if it doesn't go the way you want or I want or the things we prayed for, our focus and priorities do not change as Christians. We fight against evil. We stand for truth. We tell people the good news of Jesus Christ. We tell them the truth.
So let's not be discouraged. Don't lose heart. Don't lose the faith. Stand now strong, because the Lord has given us the great privilege of living in a time when our choices matter, when our lives matter, when our courage matters. So let's stand together and save this great country. God bless the United States of America.
There are 40 million self-described evangelical Christians who do not vote in a presidential election. If half of those people who sit in church on their blessed assurance would pray, stand, and vote, we would change every election in this country from the school board all the way to the White House.
All it takes, friends, is one generation for us to lose what is valuable, important, and sacred. Every generation has the opportunity to preserve what is right, what is godly, what is good about the United States of America, or to shirk our responsibilities and to watch what happens in just one generation in our country.
This may not be an easy task, but we are living in a moment of challenge, but also of great opportunity. And we know, always, that we are not alone, that His Spirit empowers us and protects us, and that He can do the unimaginable. Dobbs, after all, was never supposed to happen.
Father, we thank you. You have entrusted us with this moment in history, and I pray that we would be found faithful, and that as a result of our faithfulness to you, that thousands, millions would come into the kingdom as they would experience the forgiveness of sin and the new life that is found only in Jesus Christ. Amen.
Welcome back to Washington Watch. Let me encourage you to be prepared to cast your vote. Early voting's already started in many parts of the country. You can have the tools you need at your fingertips. Text the word toolkit to 67742. That's toolkit to 67742, and you'll have everything you need to cast an informed ballot. That's toolkit to 67742. All right, we continue to see the effects of the lawlessness and chaos created by the Biden-Harris administration's open border. A recent report revealed that forced labor and prostitution among underage migrants have more than tripled under the Biden-Harris administration. Now, there's nothing compassionate about these types of border policies. We've looked at the effect upon crime. We've looked at how it's impacting local communities in our schools, and children are suffering as a result of this. What's compassionate about that? Joining me now to discuss this is Madeline Rowley, a Free Press investigative reporter who spent time in Texas reporting on this growing tragedy. Madeline, welcome to Washington Watch.
Thanks so much for having me, Tony. It's great to be here.
So you reported on this explosion in sex trafficking. Tell us what you found and what you were expecting.
I did. So I traveled down to Dallas, Texas, and I shadowed a private investigator with a small nonprofit called Shepherd's Watch, and they gather intelligence. And they sort of go through dozens of online platforms, websites, and they're able to find trafficking victims. And I was able to shadow what they do and see what they do firsthand. We found a girl or a woman. It's hard to distinguish the age because the traffickers often put emojis over their faces of the women and girls in their profiles on these websites. And we were able to find a girl or a woman, and we saw firsthand at the motel. She opened the door, closed the door, and a man threw up the shades in the window below her. And it was, the private investigator said that's likely her pimp or trafficker. So this is something that I've been told through my reporting. Oh, it's in your backyard. You'd be so surprised. And while in Dallas, I was able to see that is unfortunately true. I was able to see how easy it is to order a young woman off one of these platforms. And I want to be clear that these platforms are not on the dark web. These are just regular websites that you can go on. And they are also it's also happening across social media platforms.
Madeline, I know that many law enforcement agencies are pursuing this. I mean, we saw a raid in Ohio this week where the Attorney General arrested 132 people. In your article, you talk about Sheriff Grady in Florida, who has been aggressive on this. But it's so prominent, it's difficult for law enforcement to track all of the leads that are out there, is it not?
That's correct. And that's where organizations like Shepherd's Watch come in to help them do the legwork. It's also just a pure problem with manning. There's just simply not enough resources and not enough people on local law enforcement staff to track down every single one of these leads. That's how many there are. The private investigator I shadowed said they tracked 14,000 sex solicitation ads alone in Dallas per week. That is a lot to cover. And she also told me that within 3 months of Biden opening the border in 2021, she saw that most of the ads that they were seeing were of migrant women and girls. So, this is directly tied to Biden opening the border.
So Madeline, let me ask you this question. These girls, women coming across the border, are they coming across to enter into the sex industry?
No, that's another very important thing. Often not. There are criminal cartel and gangs. Namely, for example, we've heard a lot about Tren de Aragua. They will smuggle girls across the border, promising them a better life, promising them jobs, only to trick them and force them into prostitution after they have crossed the border. So that's one very important thing is, they're telling these women one thing and doing another.
Now, for the minors that are entrapped in this, is this not at least a portion of it, a byproduct of the unaccompanied minor program, where the federal government is actually releasing these minors into the custody of people who are going to abuse them and exploit them?
Yes, that's something else that I found through my reporting. When unaccompanied children crossed the border, and there were 137,000 of them alone in 2023, they crossed the border and then are put into the federal government's custody. And the federal government contracts with specific NGOs who then shelter them. And the government is tasked with vetting the sponsors that these children are released to. And a lot of the times they're released to, family members or friends, people that they know. But sometimes, they're released to what they call Category 3 sponsors or unrelated sponsors. And a recent Office of Investigation report found that across a sample of 343 unaccompanied children, 19% of them were released to sponsors who were still awaiting their FBI fingerprints. So they are not properly vetting these sponsors that these kids go to. And then I spoke to several people who confirmed that their sponsors are the ones who then traffic them. And it's either the sponsors or another adult who is living in the home.
What ages are we talking about, Madeline?
It's mostly between the ages of 15 to 17, but it does vary.
And this is directly connected, according to the experts that you're working with, directly connected to the border policy.
That's correct. And that's clear with the child eligibility letter increase that we saw. I FOIA'd the federal government to get those updated numbers, and the child eligibility letters are given to the foreign national children who have been proven to be trafficked, whether that's in their country of origin, on the way to the United States, or within the United States. And in 2022 alone, there were 2,200 child eligibility letters given out. In Trump's presidency, it was an average of 625 a year. So that's a huge increase.
Madeline, this is just absolutely shocking and heartbreaking that our government is facilitating the exploitation of women and children. I really appreciate your report. Very insightful. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Tony.
Absolutely. And by the way, folks, many of the funds we've heard about the migrant relocation that were grants from FEMA to NGOs, that's actually where some of that money is. And as Americans are looking for money to help them recover from storms, the federal government's been using it to facilitate minors to be exploited. Tragedy. Don't go away.
Everything we do begins as an idea. Before there can be acts of courage, there must be the belief that some things are worth sacrificing for. Before there can be marriage, there is the idea that man should not be alone. Before there was freedom, there was the idea that individuals are created equal. It's true that all ideas have consequences, but we're less aware that all consequences are the fruit of ideas. Before there was murder, there was hate. Before there was a Holocaust, there was the belief by some people that other people are undesirable. Our beliefs determine our behavior, and our beliefs about life's biggest questions determine our worldview. Where did I come from? Who decides what is right and wrong? What happens when I die? Our answers to these questions explain why people see the world so differently. Debates about abortion are really disagreements about where life gets its value. Debates over sexuality and gender and marriage are really disagreements about whether the rules are made by us or for us. What we think of as political debates are often much more than that. They're disagreements about the purpose of our lives and the source of truth. As Christians, our goal must be to think biblically about everything. Our goal is to help you see beyond red and blue, left and right, to see the battle of ideas at the root of it all. Our goal is to equip Christians with a biblical worldview and help them advance and defend the faith in their families, communities, and the public square. Cultural renewal doesn't begin with campaigns and elections. It begins with individuals turning from lies to truth. But that won't happen if people can't recognize a lie and don't believe truth exists. We want to help you see the spiritual war behind the political war, the truth claims behind the press release, and the forest from the trees.
Ten Watch, good to have you with us. Website, TonyPerkins.com. All right, we've discussed this week that in less than 3 weeks, our viewers and listeners in 10 states will vote on the direction of their state when it comes to protecting life. Now, what kind of state do they want to live in? You know, what kind of state do you want to live in? You know, what kind of nation do we want to be when it comes to standing up to this attack on the unborn? Now, as I mentioned, these are in these 10 states, with the exception of Nebraska that has actually 2 amendments, 2 competing amendments. All of them are pro-abortion. They've been put on the ballot by the pro-abortion industry, trying to take not what they say, that they're just trying to move back to prior to the Dobbs case. They want to go back to Roe v. Wade, 1973, where it's the wild, wild west when it comes to abortion. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. If somebody wants to embrace and celebrate and promote the killing of babies, can you really trust what they say? Will they lie to you? I think they will. If they'll kill a baby, they'll lie to you as a voter. Well, Florida is one of the 10 states that has an abortion-promoting amendment on the ballot. It's Amendment 4, which would enshrine abortion into the Florida state constitution. And it would eliminate most of the pro-life laws that have been passed in the state of Florida over the last 40 years. Now, there was a report last week by the Secretary of State that there was widespread fraud in the collection of the signatures to put this onto the ballot. And today there was a lawsuit filed to take the ballot off, the measure off the ballot because of the fraud. Joining me now to discuss this and what the amendment would do and why you need to vote against it is Senior Counsel at Liberty Counsel and the President of Liberty Counsel Action, John Stenberger. John, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Tony, great to be with you again.
All right, before we get into the content of Amendment 4 and just how extreme it is, give us the latest on this breaking news of a lawsuit filed against Amendment 4.
Yeah, this is a very serious matter. There are apparently thousands and thousands of petitions in the citizens petition gathering process by paid petition gatherers. And as you know, this is a group of mercenaries that travel around the country. Wherever it pays the most per petition, they go all around the country. They don't really care about the issues. They just gather these petitions. And there was widespread fraud, dead people signing petitions, people who are not real people signing petitions, double signatures, all throughout various counties. Of course, the supervisor of elections did not do that granular of a search. They were looking at it, but the governor here Governor Ron DeSantis did ask supervisor of elections to do that kind of a review, and they found widespread fraud in almost every county this type. And so the fraud is big enough, Tony, that it actually disqualifies the actual amendment. They would not have made it on the ballot. They didn't have enough signatures to begin with. So today, Alan Lawson, former Supreme Court Justice of the Florida Supreme Court, now in private practice, a very sharp lawyer and former justice, filed a lawsuit on behalf of several supervisors of elections and several voters to address this fraud. Even if they did win, and I don't think they're going to win, Tony, I think we're going to beat this at the ballot box, but even if they do win, this could be struck down because of the serious nature of the way these petitions were gathered.
All right, John Stenberger, let's talk about why people should be voting against this. Let's talk about the content, what this amendment would actually do.
Yeah, well, Amendment 4 is not what it seems, and it's way too extreme. This is a full-throated pro-abortion amendment. It's very deceptive because the first part talks about viability. It sounds like the state can regulate abortion after viability, which would be kind of a Roe versus Wade structure. But then it says, or for any health reason. And health is not defined, approved by a healthcare provider. Healthcare provider is not defined. In Florida, there's 4 places in the statute that define healthcare provider. Only one of them has to do with physicians. So they've removed the requirement to even have a physician approving an abortion, even a late-term abortion. So what we're talking about is no definitions. Most constitutional amendments in Florida have definitions. There's no definitions. There's no parental consent. There is the possibility that there could be taxpayer funding of abortion. That's going to be in the financial estimation statement. So this is really an abortion on demand for any health reason through 9 months of pregnancy, even when an unborn child can feel pain. It couldn't be more radical. It's deceptive because it seems like, using the word viability, it's reasonable restriction, but it's really not.
Well, and this goes into the state constitution, which means the legislature can't fix anything. It's in the Constitution, and it'll be up to the courts to decide what these nebulous terms mean.
Well, that's right. There's really no branch of government can change this, apart from another citizen's initiative. The court can only try to define things, but the folks that wrote this amendment in scrutiny before the Florida Supreme Court and before the financial estimation conferences were asked multiple times, what do these terms mean? And they would not give an answer clearly. And so they did this on purpose.
Right.
This was done strategically. They spent millions of dollars on focus groups to try to figure out words that would trick people. And so, but they've been exposed, and we think we're going to win this at the ballot box.
They've done that in other states as well. So it's the language is a little bit different, but the undefined terms and the motives and the underlying deception is the same in these other states. John Stenberger, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate the work that you do.
Thank you, Tony.
And by the way, folks, as he mentioned, it's got a great chance of going down because it requires 60% of the voters to approve it, and right now it's not there. And as people see what this really does, they will vote against it. And you can help. If you're in Florida, text the word LIFE to 67742. In fact, if you're in any of the 10 states, and we're going to go through all of them, but text LIFE to 67742, and we've got an 18-page PDF download that will walk you through each one of these ballot initiatives and show you the fraudulent, deceptive language being used by the pro-abortion crowd. We need to take a stand against this. All right, folks, don't go away. More Washington Watch straight ahead.
Jesus said in John 15, "These things I've spoken to you, that my joy may remain in you, and that your joy may be full." In 2024, in these divided and uncertain times, how can this be possible? By abiding in Him through His Word. At Family Research Council, we want to help you do that, which is the reason for the Stand on the Word Bible reading plan. In just 10 to 15 minutes each day, you will have read the entire Bible in just 2 years. But more importantly, you will be abiding in Him daily. Find our Bible reading plan at frc.org/Bible. And join Tony Perkins each weekday for a 10-minute devotional inspired by the daily reading and designed to encourage you on this journey through the Bible. Listen on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and YouTube. And remember, the grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of our God will stand forever.
The world is hurting, streets are filled with crime, families are broken, sin is celebrated, and God is mocked. Everywhere we look, the wages of our sin are on full display. As Christians, we know that surrender to God's will is the solution to our biggest problems, but not everyone agrees. Even in church, we hear people say the most important thing is to be tolerant, that we shouldn't impose our morality on other people, and that loving our neighbor means celebrating what they do. But you can't do that. It's not that you don't love your neighbor, you do, but you care about God's opinion more than your neighbor's opinion, and this makes you different. In fact, sometimes it makes you feel alone, like you're the only one. But there is good news. You are not alone, not even close. Research has found that there are 59 million American adults who are a lot like you. There are millions of people around the country who are born again, deeply committed to practicing their faith, and believe the Bible is the reliable Word of God. But that's not all. They're also engaged in our government. They're voters. They're more likely to be involved in their community, and they're making a difference in elections. The problem is that a lot of them feel alone too. We want to change that. FRC wants to connect these 59 million Americans to speak the truth together, no matter the cost. If you want to learn more about this group and what it means to be a spiritually active, governance-engaged conservative, or if you want to find out if you are one of these SageCons yourself, go to frc.org/SageCon and take the quiz to find out. The world is hurting, and we have the solution. We can't do it alone, but we can do it if we work together. That's what we're working toward every day. Join us. Go to frc.org/SAGECON, SageCon, to learn more. That's SAGECON, SageCon, to learn more.
Welcome back to Washington Watch. Good to have you with us. Let me remind you, the toolkit's available for you. Give you everything you need to cast an informed ballot. Text the word toolkit to 67742. That's toolkit 67742. Lots of resources, and be sure to share that with your friends and family so they know how to vote as well. Our word for today comes from 2 Chronicles chapter 29. In the first year of his reign, in the first month, King Hezekiah opened the doors of the house of the Lord and repaired them. He said, "For our fathers have trespassed and done evil in the eyes of the Lord our God. They have forsaken him, turned their faces from his dwelling place, and turned their backs on him. Therefore the wrath of the Lord fell upon Judah and Jerusalem, and he has given them up to trouble, desolation, and jeering, as you see with your eyes. Now it is in my heart to make a covenant with the Lord God of Israel, that his fierce wrath may turn away from us." Here's King Hezekiah. His first priority as king was to restore the nation's spiritual health. Even as Judah suffered economically under Assyrian tribute, rather than address material concerns first, he confronted the root cause, entrenched idolatry. Through repentance and covenant renewal, God honored Hezekiah's faithfulness and brought restoration to the nation. A country's road to recovery starts with repentance, turning hearts back to God. To find out more about our journey through the Bible, text Bible to 67742. That's Bible to 67742. A new survey commissioned by the Institute for Faith and Culture in partnership with Lifeway Research reveals a troubling disconnect between what Christians believe and their day-to-day actions. While an overwhelming 93% of respondents believe it's important to interpret the world through Scripture, and 87% believe the Bible speaks to modern issues, those beliefs have not translated into the hearers of the word becoming doers of the word, as the Apostle James instructs us. So how can Christians and the church walk in alignment with the Word of God by living it and declaring it with our civic engagement? Join me now to discuss this research is Laura Cooley, Executive Director of the Institute for Faith and Culture. Laura, welcome to Washington Watch.
Thank you for having me join you today.
So let's begin by walking through the survey, the statistics on Christians' civic engagement. There seems to be a desire to engage, but not so much when it comes to actually engaging. Talk about that.
That's right. We conducted this survey with Lifeway because we were really curious about evangelicals' actions outside of the four walls of the church. We believe that the Bible speaks to all of life, and that while our faith is to be a personal faith, deeply personal, it's not to remain private. It's to be shared with others and to go out into the different spheres of culture that we have influence in and to share the biblical values that we believe. And so we know that there's unfortunately many pulpits that don't talk about the Bible in terms of a cultural mandate. They focus a lot more just on a Great Commission. And so we were curious if the lack of engagement in civic participation came from a lack of teaching coming from pulpits. But we found something even more interesting. It's not just that some churches shy away from the public square. It's actually that Christians do know that they should be involved in politics and government. They do know they should be involved in culture and every sphere of their life, but they're they're afraid to do so for some reason. So they know, they believe, but then they fail to act. And so this survey uncovered that for us.
Let's talk a little bit about that. What is it that keeps them from engaging? Because you kind of drilled down on that to ask them. So what did you discover?
Well, there were a few things that we discovered. First, even though people want to have those tough conversations, they don't necessarily feel equipped to. And that's why we as an Institute for Faith and Culture exist. We exist to equip Christians for this cultural moment. We do that through worldview training, practical training, biblical resources, connecting your biblical values to the way you live your life. So people don't feel equipped to do so. That's unfortunate. Maybe that comes from a lack of teaching and making that connection point from the pulpit. Maybe it's just something where they need to dive deeper in the Word and do that maybe through a small group or through Sunday school or a Wednesday night study. And then we also found that people are just scared. We see so often that if you speak out on issues of our day and you speak with moral clarity, you get called names, you get demonized. There's a lot of different names that we've been called recently. I know Christian nationalism is a big boogeyman. They might call you racist. They might call you sexist. But the reality is the reasons we talk about these issues is because we love others. We think that God's design is what's best for human flourishing. And so to be scared of being called names is really not a great reason why not to follow God's word.
Well, Laura, that would suggest fear is ruling their faith, and that would go back to the Bible, because you actually ask questions about how much time do you spend in the Bible, because the Bible speaks to this issue of fear repeatedly. Do not fear, have no fear, because that's quite frankly, the default position of most people is to be fearful of what others say, what others think, what others might do, and so. I think the remedy to that is to see more people in the Scripture. What did you find out about scriptural engagement with those that you surveyed?
Yes, we did see a correlation between those who are in the Word daily or weekly, and then also in church frequently on Sunday morning. We're more likely to feel equipped to go out and share what they believe. And that was not just in civic engagement, that was also in the workplace with neighbors or with friends. And so there definitely is something to be said that the more engaged you are within your church or with your spiritual life, and it's not just something that you believe culturally, but it's something that you tangibly it impacts your life every single day, you are more likely to live that out in the different spheres that you have influence in.
So Laura, as you commissioned this survey, were there any surprises that you found in the results?
Well, one thing that I found a little surprising was that there was actually a little bit more courage from folks living in the Northeast and the South, and not so much in the Midwest. And I can't tell you why that is. I would love to do additional questions and additional surveys. But I wonder if it's because sometimes we're in groups that feel culturally Christian, but aren't necessarily biblically Christian. And what I mean by that is, oh, well, I believe some conservative values and my family members are Christians, so I might be a Christian too, versus having a true personal faith where you believe what you believe and you're willing to act based on what you believe. And so that might be why in areas where your neighbors might not be a Christian, if you are one, it's because you truly believe it, not because everybody else is.
Lauren, how can people find out more about what you're doing there to help equip people to be able to speak to these issues and to have confidence in sharing their faith?
Sure. We have a lot of different biblical worldview resources at our website, institutefc.org. We would invite everyone to visit that website. It's institutefc.org. We have articles, we have a podcast, City of God podcast. We have a lot of different content that speaks to different hot button issues of our day. We also do an annual Kingdom Come conference in Fort Lauderdale in the spring. And so when it's cold up north, I'd invite everyone to come to Fort Lauderdale and enjoy some sun and some biblical worldview training. But we also are running a Vote Your Faith campaign in partnership with an organization called Vote Your Faith. And that's really focused on this election cycle. We all know the statistics that so many Christians are planning on sitting this one out. And we want to help Christians connect their biblical values to their civic duty, because we believe that voting's not just a civic right that you have, but it's a biblical responsibility. And so that's something that I think we all need to be thinking top of mind right now.
Yeah, so true, so true. Lauren, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate the insight and very, very interesting survey.
Anytime. Thank you.
As she said, as Americans, we have a right to vote, but as Christians, we have a responsibility to vote. Now, to help answer some of these questions, or to overcome some of the concerns that Christians in this survey, there was 1,000. It was a pretty good size survey, so it's pretty accurate, I would think. To help Christians, and we know that we've seen this before, being intimidated, not feeling like they have a good handle on the issue, that they don't have a fully developed biblical worldview, so they're a little intimidated to speak in environments in where there's hostile views. And frankly, today, if you're going to talk about truth, there's going to be hostility. But that's one of the main focuses of our Center for Biblical Worldview here at the Family Research Council, is to help Christians understand the issues of our day from a biblical perspective, and then to be able to speak to them. And then we also have resources to help you understand where the candidates stand on these issues, and help you share that information with your friends. Because someone who is informed, involved, has the ability to shape the actions of others. And that's what we call SageCon, spiritually active, governance-engaged conservatives. People look to them for guidance. And we're trying to equip the SageCons to help others cast an informed ballot. And number one, cast that ballot, but number two, make sure it's informed. Join me. I'm going to bring Brent Kylan in, to our Vice President of Strategic Initiatives here at the Family Research Council, to talk a little bit more about this. Brent, welcome to Washington Watch. Good to have you today.
Good to be with you, Tony. Thanks.
So you actually brought this survey to my attention. We were discussing it this morning, which is why we had Lauren on the program. Many of these obstacles or hesitations that people expressed in this survey are things that we're doing here at the Family Research Council to help people cross that line and engage. Let's talk about that.
Absolutely, Tony. We have a number of those resources. You talked about the Center for Biblical Worldview and some great resources on key issues there. But, one of the practical ways here leading up to the election is resources to equip people for Election Day as well. There's a lot of Christians who are looking for those types of resources. And what we've done for that area specifically is we've put together a voter impact toolkit. This is kind of a one-stop shop. We've been working for a long time, years and years at FRC and FRC Action, equipping people to engage in elections. This toolkit really takes all of the questions we frequently get and puts them all answers all of those in one source. You can access this through our Stand Firm app. So that's our free app. Just look on the App Store for Stand Firm or text. I know you were promoting that earlier, but toolkit to 67742. And what you'll get when you access the voter toolkit there is a number of resources. We have voter guides that compare where the candidates are at on key issues. There's a presidential voter guide comparison. There's iVoter Guide, which covers all of the federal races, most of the state races, and also some ballot initiatives and local races. There's also information on prayer points. There's a lot of people wondering, how do I pray for the election right now? This is just so important culturally, but also spiritually. It's got some great information on that. It's got the publication in it that I think is really relevant to this conversation, Biblical Principles for Political Engagement. This is for people, really wanting to connect those dots. What does the Bible actually say about issues like this? Also, if you're wanting to engage your church, you're probably going to bump into some legal questions. What can we and can't we do? So it's got some legal do's and don'ts for you. And then lastly, Tony, a lot of folks it is kind of the 11th hour, but still might wonder about their voter registration. And there are some places where you can still register to vote. You can check your voter registration status. So that's also there as well. There's a link you can follow to see where you're at with voter registration. So if you download the app, you can take this with you wherever you go. So it's very user friendly. And I would also say a lot of these resources can be shared, texted from the app. So if you have a friend or family member who you think would benefit from one of these resources, you can just text it right from the toolkit. Say, hey, I thought you might be interested in this, and help share and engage others as well.
Brent, as we've been talking about this election and the issues, and of course we've been very candid in sharing our concerns about a lack of focus from the Republican Party on some of the core conservative issues. But there's still a very strong contrast between the two parties and where they stand on these issues. It might not be as strong as we would like, but for those who would say, you know what, I don't like the contentious nature of the politics. I don't like how they've weakened on some of these issues. That's not an excuse not to vote. I mean, we can talk about these things, and we should talk about them because we need to fix them in the future, but we still need to vote in this election.
We absolutely do, Tony. And like you said, there is still a contrast on some very key issues. So you can find that comparison of the party platforms there in the voter toolkit. Tony, to build on what you're saying, though, I would also say, there's a lot of folks that feel like if I'm not in one of these key swing states for the presidential election, my vote doesn't matter anyway. And the reality is that we know there are so many other races as well, from the top of the ballot all the way down to school boards and local races, that are very important. Some of these races are going to be very close in deep blue states, in deep red states. I could give you a whole list of historically very close races where people didn't think they would be, but they found themselves in races decided by 1, 2, 5, 10 votes. And so I would just encourage folks, wherever you're at in the country, there are going to be important races on your ballot. So make sure you are getting out and voting, and you're encouraging other people to do the same.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just a handful of votes are going to decide probably control of the United States Congress. It's that important. Brent Kylan, thanks so much for joining me today.
You bet, Tony. Appreciate it.
And folks, you can get that information. Again, text the word toolkit to 67742. That's toolkit to 67742. Thanks for joining me today. Until next time, I leave you with the encouraging words of the Apostle Paul, found in Ephesians 6, where he says, when you've done everything that you can do, when you've prayed, when you've prepared, and when you've taken your stand, by all means, keep standing.
Washington Watch with Tony Perkins is brought to you by Family Research Council and is entirely listener-supported. Portions of the show discussing candidates are brought to you by Family Research Council Action. For more information on anything you heard today, or to find out how you can partner with us in our ongoing efforts to promote faith, family, and freedom, visit tonyperkins.com.